Hi, this is Elisa Cooper, and I'm here with Matt Serlin, and we'd like to welcome you to this edition of the Brandsight podcast. And a topic we've been talking a lot about for the last few months at least is GDPR. And we'd like to give a bit of an update of where things are. We're just about 25 days out to the enforcement of the GDPR, and there's still a lot going on. So Matt, maybe you can give us sort of an update of where things stand.
Yep, so we are May 1st today, so we're coming up on it, as Elisa mentioned, and lots of activity, lots of email traffic on it, certainly. And I think the latest, which we'll probably see play out here in the next several days, this week and probably into next week, a group of representatives from ICANN contracted parties, the registrars and the registries, met down in Los Angeles with some senior ICANN staff to talk about the path forward relative to GDPR and who is and contractual requirements and the like. And I think what is likely to happen is that we will see the ICANN board pass a temporary policy, which can essentially be in place for up to a year, which will require registrars and registries to essentially alter their WHOIS output from what it is today, which would not be GDPR compliant, to what was in the ICANN proposed model from, I believe it was published in March, which essentially limits the data that's displayed in publicly available WHOIS to the organization name, the city, and the province. There will not be any further contact information like email addresses, phone numbers, physical addresses. That information will not be published in the publicly available WHOIS. So there will be a temporary policy, I believe, that will then allow the registrars and registries to, as long as they are supporting and providing that data in the publicly available WHOIS, then they will be in compliance with their contracts. So then in conjunction with that, because that's just a temporary policy, the actual policy development process will then kick off, and it will probably be an expedited policy development process, which in ICANN's world means it can maybe take a year, and that's expedited, to actually make that what's called consensus policy, though, so that it will become effective, forever going forward, until any policy changes happen. What is not likely to be included is, at least on May 25th, is this notion of access to non-public WHOIS information. So as we've said before, all of the, from a registrant standpoint, so those registering domain names, the process will look basically just like it does today, very similar. You will still provide the same information to the registrar. It's just that information will not be displayed in the WHOIS output. So then the question is, well, how do folks like intellectual property companies, brand protection companies, law enforcement, how do they get access to that non-public data? There's been proposals that have been put out. There's been a lot of discussion. But in the interim, it does not appear that ICANN is going to require and contractually bind the registrars and registries to any kind of non-public access like that. It will essentially be up to each individual registrar and registry to make that information available based on requirements that individual registrar or registry could come up with. So you could see after May 25th, if you want to get access to an address, an email address, a phone number, the process could vary based on where the domain is registered.
I think one thing we may see, though, is registries stepping back from having a relationship with the registrant, which, for the most part, they don't have today, right? The relationship is between the registrar and the registrant. So it's likely that it will always be the registrar which a company is contacting, in the situation that there is an infringement or an issue or fraud or some sort of nefarious activity, that it's the registrar that you will need to go to. And frankly, in light of sort of new GTLDs, it doesn't make much difference because there are just as many new GTLD registries and registries in total as there are registrars. It used to be you didn't want to have to deal with all the individual registrars because there were so many. But now that there's so many registries as well, it's sort of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other.
Yep, I think that's right. And just to be clear, what I do think will take place is, this notion of the access to the non-public WHOIS data is not going to go away. So I think there will either be an explicit commitment to start a policy development process to address that, or there will be some mention of moving in that direction at some point in the future. But I don't see how there's any way that is going to be a requirement on May 25th. No. It's just not going to happen. No. The question is really then, how long does it take? Is it something that gets done before the end of the year? Is it something that takes a year or two? I mean, it just, as we've said, I don't know, going back a decade or so, in terms of ICANN timelines, it's really, really hard to gauge where things will end up being completed.
I think the other thing that it looks like it might be a requirement is a requirement to allow registrants to show the full WHOIS contact information. And, that is, having that in place in the next 4 weeks or so, having that capability, if a registrar was planning to just publish the minimum information, which is, in the calzone model, and then going to somehow also have the ability to, in the workflow, allow the registrant to say, no, actually show my full WHOIS information. That's a lot of work for the registrars to implement in the next 4 weeks. So I'm not sure how that is going to be able to happen, how the registrars will meet that requirement if that does become a requirement, unless, the registrars decide to leverage their existing privacy services and just basically make all of the registrations private and then allow a registrant to, unmask the domain. So, some unknowns there still.
Yeah, I mean, listen, the reality is there's going to have to be some leeway here, right? I mean, we're at May 1st right now. The ICANN board meets, I believe, in the next couple weeks, but that still is only, I don't see a scenario that they can pass a temporary policy and expect every contracted party to be in compliance within 2 weeks, especially if it has things in there that folks weren't anticipating. And I think, frankly, that is one of them. This notion of allowing the registrant to opt in to showing all their data as a requirement. So it will continue to be interesting to see how this plays out. But we're less than a month away from GDPR being enforceable. So and it's also clear that date, in terms of any forbearance or any extension of penalties and investigations by the data protection authorities, it's crystal clear that's not going to happen. So that May 25th date is set in stone. That's not changing.
Another big question I have, and I just have not heard a clear answer on it, I don't think, and that is whether or not providers of reverse WHOIS databases are going to continue to provide access to that data after May 25th, after GDPR goes into enforcement. And I just haven't heard clearly, and maybe we won't, and maybe we just have to log in and see what's there.
Yeah, I mean, remember, like with any regulation or law, it requires someone to file a complaint, to have the data protection authorities investigate and come to a conclusion. So at that point, for companies that are providing really any service, it's all about a risk calculation, right? So, I think you're right. I don't know that we're going to get any visibility into what companies that have reverse WHOIS tools are going to be doing, except logging in and seeing, what a reverse WHOIS report looks on March 26th versus what it looks like on May 25th versus May 1st, right? I don't think there's going to be a lot of public declarations about what those folks are going to do with that data.
To that end, a couple of, interesting bits about .is and .eu actually.
Yeah, so there was a article this week talking about the Icelandic registry choosing to continue to publish email addresses. Now, Iceland is not in the EU, but interesting statement by a registry nonetheless. And then it got us thinking and looking at what others were doing, and lo and behold, the .eu registry, again, this is the registry for folks in the European Union, has stated their intention to continue to publish email addresses, even for domain names registered to individuals. Now, they do allow an opt-out opportunity to registrants, but really, it's just very interesting to me that you've got, GDPR is a European Union regulation, and you've got ICANN and all the contracted parties really all around the world turning, their systems upside down and, right side up and sideways to change the whois output to comply with GDPR, and removing email addresses is a big part of that. And then you've got .eu that's going to continue to publish them. So it's just very interesting to see how this all plays out, and the different paths forward that all these different contracted parties, registries, registrars have.
Yeah, I mean, I can hardly believe it's happening, because it's been such a big part of ICANN and brand protection, just making whois records publicly available and accessible. That's been core to even our participation at ICANN. And so to have this radical change happening is pretty hard to wrap your head around.
No, I mean, it's, listen, for the past 16 plus years, I can't think of too many work days that I haven't utilized a publicly available whois record for any number of reasons, right? And I'm sure many of you out there have done the same thing. And so, when that changes, and when, we're used to being able to validate, ownership and email address and things like that in a whois record, when we can't do that, it's just going to be a very different paradigm.
Yeah, definitely.
But, like we've always said, there's very few slow days around the domain name industry, which is what makes it exciting. And this is definitely one of those times, for sure.
For sure. Well, we've got the upcoming GDD meeting, and we also have the upcoming ICANN meeting, and we'll be paying close attention and reporting on both of those. So we're continuing to monitor and provide feedback, and we will be talking to you again. As always, thank you for joining us for today's podcast, and we look forward to speaking with you soon.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.